All right, hard yarners, very, very insightful episode. We were joined, he's gone now, but by Senator Gerard Rennick, and I'm going to say, not illustrious, I'm going to say well-informed Corey White, very popular man amongst our listeners.
Yeah, I do have illustrious locks. So how bad's his haircut?
It's okay.
It's a shocker, but the episode's better than the haircut, that's for sure.
Mate, very, very, very good episode. But firstly, this episode's brought to you by alltradescover.com.au. John the Great Man, he's doing some very good things actually. But get around All Trades Cover if you've got a big business, small business, you're a tradie in any way, hit them up, at least get a competitive quote, and they should be able to come back to you. They're actually giving me my liability insurance for my show that I'm putting on in April. Little subtle plug there of Return to Zero. Also, this episode is brought to you by Feed Supplements. Do you take any supplements at all, really, ever?
Nah, mate.
You don't strike me as the supplement guy.
When you look this good, Branchy, you don't need supplements.
But they're great, mate. They're awesome. I have the beef organ complex, the liver. They got collagen, honey. I don't know if you can tell the collagen's taken off, it's really good. It helps you. It's bioavailability because it's animal sourced. It's pretty good. So get involved with them. Use the code word HARDYARN and you'll get a percentage off. I think it's 10 or 15%. This episode's also brought to you by Kahuna Golf. We do have to actually go play a bit of golf because you don't mind it, hey?
Yeah, I can hit a golf ball, swing a club.
Well, we'll go play golf.
Do we get a fucking buggy though?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I've got a off air. I'll tell you a good deal I just got actually.
Yeah, great.
But Kahuna Golf. Look good, feel good, play good. I used to wear the hat. Didn't wear the hat today. Sorry, Jimmy. But Kahuna Golf. They've got all the attire, shirts, shorts, hats, even the golf rags. They're bloody awesome, and they've got a new range coming out. I keep saying they've got a new range coming out, but poor Jimmy got married, and that took up the time for him. So get involved with Kahuna Golf. Also, this episode, I think, and finally, is brought to you by Goat Tape. Goat Tape, as you can see on the front of our microphones, if you're watching at home, put it on your nose, breathe a lot better, breathe easier, and it's really good for your sleeping. You get a lot more recovery in, and when you're running and doing exercise, you can definitely notice it. So use the code word HARDYARN for 10 to 15% off. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors. But this episode, we were joined by Senator Gerard Rennick. He stayed on for nearly an hour, which he was only going to give us about half an hour, so that's great. And the Honourable Corey White. What did we chat about? Do you recall?
Oh, everything from economic policy to do the spy agencies have enough oversight in this country. Mm-hmm. What else was there, Branchy? He talked about the vaccine injuries, his journey out of the major parties. Major party Fred. Major party Fred.
And his concerns about the hate speech laws as well. So it was a pretty all-encompassing episode, really good episode, and I think people are going to get a lot out of this one. So without further ado, let's get hard.
Welcome to Hard Yarns Podcast.
I am fucking fat.
Anything Chris White says, please disregard it.
5D is actually a state of being. It's a unity consciousness.
That was Hard Yarns with me, Frankie Rose. So I'm going to throw it over to your co-host,
Daniel Jelby.
And Cameron Branch.
I would do this and then I'd gong.
Free in attendance for the millions listening at home. Let's get hard.
Perfect. All right. Yeah. So thanks so much for joining us. Firstly, because time's pretty limited. Australia, the People First Party, pretty big change up. What's been happening there?
Long story short, I originally became a senator with the LNP. We're a coalition over here in Queensland with the National Party, unlike Western Australia. I was with the LNP for about 4 years, actually 5 years in the end, but the reason why I left was a number of reasons. I lost my pre-selection, and that was because I withheld my vote back in 2021, late 2021, as a result of the vaccine injuries that many Australians were incurring. Indeed, actually, it was a Western Australian lady, 37-year-old police officer, Chantal Uran, who suffered a stroke from the vaccine and basically had her injuries gaslighted early on. She was one of the first people I spoke to, and when she was being gaslighted and ignored and was a serious injury, I just felt like I had to do something, but I'll come back to that later. So anyway, I lost my pre-selection. It turns out that there are a material number of irregularities, and it would appear that the head office actually deliberately, well, we know that they amended at least one record. They told Peter Dutton that he couldn't vote, and then the day before, and he was going to vote for me, and the day before they gave a vote each to David Littleproud and the little Brisbane Lord Mayor, who voted against me despite that fact they weren't eligible to vote. A number of ballots were handed out in the observer section, things like that. So when I went back to the party and said, and as did Peter Dutton, told them to do it again, they wouldn't do it. So we went to court, and the court basically said we can't tell political parties what to do. And I'm like, well, sorry, but the people who make the rules should be held to their own rules as well. So I decided in August last year to leave the party so I could go out and basically talk about solutions, talk about policies. When you're inside a major party, you're gagged more or less. And most of my term, it's been dealing with climate change crisis, COVID crisis, and the voice. And I just wanted to go back to talk about solutions, in particular economic solutions, because I still say nothing controls you more than debt and the need to, put money in your pocket. And my background is in finance. So I've got a Master's of Tax Law, a Bachelor of Commerce, and a Master's of Applied Finance and Treasury. I have a good understanding of global capital markets and how Australia basically uses too much foreign debt, and over a period of time, combine that with the sale of our infrastructure, we're going backwards. We're slowly being strangled by too much debt, period.
It's pretty interesting, Corey.
Senator, can I just, first of all, good luck for the election and congratulations for leaving a major party. I know the divorces are always difficult, and I know you said on the 10th of September, which is my birthday, so I also, flicking through, unusual to see a conservative, or what is a conservative anymore, being harassed by Sky News for your comments. You got yourself in a bit of hot water there. You always know when someone's on the money when Sky News is having a hissy fit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got, look, there's certain journalists at Sky News who I get on well with and they support what I do, but then there's other journalists at Sky News who are part of the establishment. So the Liberal Party's effectively got, there's the what I call the overt factions of the wets versus the dries, or the left versus the right. But then there's the covert faction, which is really, there's two types of people in the Liberal Party. There's the born to rule types, and then there's the I want the government out of my life types. And to be fair to the Liberal Party, most people in the Liberal Party are of the view that they want the government out of their life. They don't want the government telling them what to do. But unfortunately, it's those born to rule types that get into politics in their university days. They get, become staffers. Their whole life depends on the success of the political party because that's all they know, and they get a born to rule mentality. And, I butted heads very early on inside the party as an elected senator because they were constantly trying to tell me what I couldn't say. And I thought in the Liberal Party we were supposed to have freedom of choice and freedom of conscience.
It's a broad tent, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, but as I really realised, at the end of the day, they want you to stick to the talking points. And as my former colleague and good friend Keith Pitt said when he left the party last year, what they call party discipline, they really mean party obedience. And, and look, I get it that you're not going to go out every day and call out your own party because you disagree with every policy, right? Like, I mean, obviously, there is a broad, even within the Labor Party, because when you've only got the two major parties and they're representing 50% of each, well, they don't anymore, but let's just keep it simple, 50% of the population, we're all going to have diverse views within that 50% as well, right? But in the case of the vaccine injuries, for example, it was critical. It was here and now. Something drastic had to happen because healthy people, particularly young ones, were getting a jab and then having their life destroyed. They were losing their health. They were losing their financial capacity to earn an income. That has then led to, in many cases, people with severe mental health issues, as well as, people have actually had to sell their houses. Now, compare that to, say, climate change, which is still a serious issue, and using the renewables to the extent that they could end up, destroying the grid. Even though that's a serious issue, it's not as drastic in the short term because people aren't necessarily losing their jobs. So when I sort of I did in October 2021, I had to do it because my conscience wouldn't allow me to walk away from people who are having their lives severely destroyed, if not, in some cases, I'm pretty sure people were killed, judging by the numbers on the ABS.
Senator, can I just turn towards the ANZUS alliance and where the Americans are and the state of the liberal international order. In terms of the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, historically, the ANZUS treaty's been the bedrock of Australian policy. But I think we're now entering into a period where we have to consider potentially independence. What's the view in Canberra with that? Is it still a slavish adherence to the Americans, or is there a growing sort of
Recording
movement
in
to question
progress.
about our independent foreign policy and our own capabilities to defend ourselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, there is still a slavish dependence on US policy, and I'd probably admit I'm still in that camp for the simple reason that we are an isolated country in the South Pacific. You know, and we do need to rely on our allies very heavily to defend Australia. Now, before I go any further, I just want to clarify I'm a big supporter of the United States. I'm not a big supporter of the deep state. And the deep state, as we saw under Biden, has infiltrated the White House. Right, so what the deep state does and what the United States and the people of the United States do are two different things. Okay, so the country of the United States and how it was founded on the Revolutionary War, and they basically gave the middle finger to the establishment, the European aristocrats, and they said to the Bank of England, no, we're not going to use your currency, we're going to use our own currency, we're not going to pay taxes back to England. All of that stuff where effectively the American Revolution was a manifestation of the European Enlightenment that overthrew the hereditary powers of kings and queens, and they were the first ones to really install democracy whereby for the people, by the people, and that is a philosophy I agree with, and that is where we have our shared values. I also have a deep sense of gratitude towards the United States for the sacrifices they made in helping protect Australia in World War II. Okay? Now, having said all that, we need to be as independent as possible. And so, I'll go over there, just to finish off, that doesn't mean to say that we should get involved in wars that serve the interests of the deep state. And I would say, and many American people who live in the United States would agree with me, they don't want their own troops, because in the same way our troops join the Australian Defence Force, you know, their troops join, their soldiers join the American Defence Force. That is to defend their country, right? So when we've got involved in these wars in the Middle East or in Ukraine, which was effectively, you know, orchestrated by what I call the deep state Democrats, that is not what we should be getting involved in. And Trump and JD Vance, I'm pleased to say, have the same view, right? They don't want to go getting involved in quagmires in foreign countries. Now, having said all that, we need to focus on when we have a defence force, it is just that. It's not an offence force, it is a defence force. And we need to have develop our military so that it is capable of defending Australia.
And this is the question I'd like to ask, Senator, because I mean, I read you read your maiden speech, and I know you speak heavily of the values of self-reliance and Australians having sovereign control of their own assets and resources. When I'd say your economic, would it be fair to describe you as an economic nationalist in that regard? Because some of what your economic philosophy is would align with Gough Whitlam in many ways. And his independent stance against the United States was, I guess, and not just that, was the economic vision of the Whitlam government. Do you think that there's a contradiction between an economic policy that can deliver independence from foreign powers and the ability to
carry a defence policy?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, because economically we have got a vast abundance of wealth and resources and a small population. And so my philosophy, regardless of wherever you're located on earth, is that governments should own sovereign infrastructure because they're monopolies and they are needed for the security of a country. So we need cheap baseload power stations, we need dams, we need good roads, we need good ports, we need good airports, we need good telecommunications. All of those things, it's in the national interest that they belong to the Australian people.
Does that extend to the mineral and resource wealth in your view? Because I know you grew up in Chinchilla, which has been very rich in gas and somewhat controversially.
Yeah.
Do you think that the policy settings are right to be able to facilitate that change, given the power of vested interests of the resources sector in this country, when sensible public policy is proposed and its ability to be neutered in, you know, the parliament and the press? Is it possible anymore?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think our settings in regards to minerals are fairly good, except with the exception of offshore gas. So onshore gas, you have to pay a royalty, as you do with minerals. And with coal here in Queensland, depending on the price of coal, the royalty itself could be as high as 14% on the sale. Now, on top of that, you then pay company tax of 30 cents. You also pay payroll tax. You also pay GST on all the vehicles and everything you spend. And then obviously you're employing people as well, which then has a flow-on effect throughout regional Queensland and Brisbane. Unfortunately, regional Queensland doesn't get much of those royalties back, which many regional Queenslanders aren't happy about. Now, the other issue, and this is where they love to bag out mining companies, but it's actually where the issue is, and I've touched on this, we need to increase the rate of tax on profits sent offshore, because we've currently got an onshore tax rate in this country of 30 cents in the dollar. But depending on tax treaty, they're often interest, royalties, rent, etc., between 0 and 15 cents. So I've highlighted the case, and this is why I get annoyed when everyone takes just mining companies. You take Pfizer in 2022, they had $1.4 billion of sales here in Australia. They shifted $1 billion of that offshore to Ireland for royalties. The withholding tax on royalties to Ireland is 10 cents. The company tax in Ireland is 12.5 cents. Just ignoring the fact that they get a credit. 10 plus 12.5 is 22.5 cents. That's still less than 30 cents. So they're getting a 7.5. Pfizer's shifting $1 billion offshore and getting a 7.5 cent arbitrage profit on just doing a few journal entries to shift profits back to Ireland. So if we want to stop profits going offshore, we need to lift the rate of withholding tax applied to those profits going offshore. And that will encourage those earnings to stay here and reduce the level of debt we need to bring onto this country.
It's interesting you say that. I completely agree. The only it's facilitated by firms like PricewaterhouseCoopers and KPMG, etc., etc. And I know that there's a lot of talk around privatising the bureaucracy by stealth, by effectively contracting out work for the bureaucracy to these consulting firms. Do you see that as a real problem in this country, getting sensible public policy decisions when they're placed in the hands of firms like KPMG?
Yeah, I see it as a real problem, but don't blame the accounting firms, blame the stupid politicians that go to Canberra. Because the fact of the matter is, I have spent the last 5.5 years, I've explained it to Josh Frydenberg, I explained it to Jim Chalmers, I've explained it to numerous politicians what needs to happen. Ultimately, we and our two-party system, whereby the people who become ministers are nothing more than glorified yes men. And that's the problem. They listen to the bureaucrats and they don't listen to the subject matter experts. I was a subject matter expert in tax law or tax structuring, given my experience, and no one has listened to me. And that's, like I said earlier, that's one of the reasons why I actually left the party, was because I realised I'm wasting my breath talking about this inside the party, because, they're not listening. So KPMG and these guys exploit the existing tax laws. It's up to the Minister of the day and the Treasury to close these loopholes, right? And they're not doing it.
Senator, are these loopholes deliberately created?
I've raised it with, yeah.
Are these loopholes deliberately created? And part of the other issue is the revolving door between public and private, and government ministers going to work for firms like KPMG or Goldman Sachs when they leave Parliament. Are these seeds put in the legislation or the regulations, whatever format the law is in, as favours for mates, and then you're rewarded when you leave Parliament with a job on the board?
It's not as explicit as that. What it is, it's the pressure of you're told that we always have relied on foreign capital, so we have to do this to attract foreign capital, right? Now, the foreign capital we attract is usually in the form of debt. As a sovereign country, we actually have equity over all of this country. So it's generally by design, but done in an ignorant manner, because the ministers and people, when they vote on this in Parliament, don't actually understand what they're voting on. So you will get the tax board who are, it may not be the tax board, but you will get vested interests that come and lobby the Prime Minister, and I go, it's the biggest one is this myth that we have to attract foreign capital. We don't need to attract any foreign capital, because capital is two things. It's debt and equity, right? The right-hand side of a balance sheet, the credits. We have the equity over all the rainfall that falls out of the sky. We have equity over all the 7 million kilometres of soil. We have equity over all the sunlight that falls on that soil. And as the words of our national anthem says, it's wealth for toil. It's not wealth for foreign debt. So we have weak and insipid and ignorant politicians who don't know what to do. And many of these people, they decide to run for politics, but they don't actually know. They want to see Australia, they want to, to be fair to them, they do run because they want to see a better country. But the reality of it is very few of them actually have solutions. They're very good at pressing buttons, but they're not very good at pressing solutions.
They're robots, and to borrow your phrase, major party bred and major party fed. These people have never had real jobs outside of the bubble of politics. Yeah. Can I ask you this question?
Sorry to cut you off there. Can I just, and the thing is, on the margin, so the marginal seats, you'll often get good people coming in with life experience, but in those safe seats where where you get a job, where you become a MP and you'll stay for 20 years, they're the ones who become the ministers. So, you'll get a lot of frustrated backbenchers, but the problem is they rarely get into the ministry because you've got to do 2 or 3 terms at least to get into the ministry. I mean, there are exceptions, but by the time it's their turn to get into the ministry, they lose the election and they go out with the tide. And that's the problem. It's those careerists who started off as staffers. They line up a safe Liberal seat or a safe Labor seat. They've been, they've climbed the greasy pole because they're very good at sucking up to their bosses and being yes men. But the problem is, once you become a yes minister, you can't be a yes man. You've got to be a no man and actually say, no, I don't agree with that. You've got to do it this way. But they don't have the intelligence or the life experience to do that.
Yeah, so you touched on it before, the transparency of spending, and we've obviously seen a pretty largely media shown, I guess, it's almost like a scripted play that we're seeing over in US politics of this Doge investigation. But you're pretty big on the transparency of spending here in Australia. So how do we hope to have something similar over here without it turning into this big media farce that we see every day over there?
Well, I mean, this comes back to the quality of your ministers. I mean, coming from the private sector, I mean, I've been a management accountant as well. We do month-end reports every month where we look at our costs. We look at, and then we obviously do year-to-date figures where we're comparing year-to-date figures from this year, from year-to-date figures from last year, where we're comparing it to the budget figures. And you've basically got, your executives saying, right, costs are up 10% or they're from last year, or they're up 10% from what we budgeted for. Why is that? Go and give me an account listing on this, this, and this. You pull out, you get an account listing, you pull out your ruler, you go through, right, what's this invoice for? Why'd we spend this? Likewise, when you're managing staff doing one or two things, you're either doing recurring roles or contract roles where it's time to completion. If it's a recurring role, you say, give me a job description by the day of the month that you're doing it, or the day of the week. Likewise, for contract roles, you've got to go, give me the percentage of completion. Is this where you budgeted to be? And you've got to sit down and actually get into the weeds, right? And that's not just a one-off Doge exercise. That's a constant, ongoing, monthly management account process where you're constantly reviewing your costs. You're looking at, your outputs for that. So in a private sector, for example, it would be the level of your sales and the service delivery and the quality of that service delivery. In the government, it would be more a case of the service delivery and whether you're making sure you'd be looking at things like ambulance waiting lists if you're state level, and things, the level of veterans or mental health issues. If we had a war in Afghanistan thing, you'd be going, well, what, after about the second or third year, you would have been going, well, hang on, why have we made no ground in 3 years? What are we doing here? Oh, that's right, CIA's peddling heroin. I mean, these are the things we've got to be asking ourselves what we're doing. Questions. And the ministers, because as I said before, have been yes men all their life, they're not doing it. But yet again, this is why we need a party that's going to offer solutions rather than just engage in the usual name calling and things like that.
Well, the recent bill that was passed in regards to the way that you can donate and fundraise for the independents, and it seems like the two-party system have come together and they've worked together to make it so independents like yourself can't really compete in the next election. How did that unfold and how quickly did it happen?
Oh, on the day, it unfolded very, very quickly. We knew it was coming, and we had time, but we just didn't have the numbers. I mean, once the two major parties gang up on us, there's not much you can do other than bleat about it and try and raise awareness. But the big killer that I've been on about is, minor parties don't get any funding until they get the 4% of the vote. Which, the Greens and One Nation will get their but then the other parties won't. And the other one is they've increased registration fees for lower house candidates from what was $500 a few elections ago. They jumped to $1,000, and then they just doubled it this election to $2,000. So we won't be running candidates because the cost of running just registering candidates is $300,000 across the country, and that's before you run anything else like call flutes or how to vote cards or a little bit of advertising or something like that. So when it was $500 a candidate, it was $75,000, and that's where they're also and this is the thing: if you pay, my view is, if major parties can get their costs refunded for over 4% of the vote, why can't minor parties get their costs refunded for less than 4% of the vote? If it's $2,000 to register, that should be, if you get your 500 votes or 600 votes at $3 a vote, you should be able to at least claim your costs back to make it a level playing field. But they know what they're doing, and they're trying to make it as very hard as possible.
Yeah, it seems so obvious, but it doesn't seem like there's anything we can do about it.
Well, all you can do, and it's going to be a long game, is get active and join a minor party, work on and persist. I mean, politics is a long game. It's not a spectator sport. And, you don't have to be involved in politics. You don't have to, do a lot every week over the 3-year cycle. It's generally more towards, you'll be 2 or 3 months around that election cycle, and then say go to a few branch meetings, a couple of times every year. But you just want to make sure that you keep a large number of grassroots members. You want to look for good candidates that have not only are intelligent and erudite, but are well known in the local community, as well as they're capable of engaging and influencing decision makers. I think we really need to lift the standard and the quality of the people in the crossbench at the moment. Yeah. Some of them are very antagonistic. They generally end up in the press for the wrong reasons, because they've been screaming and shouting in the Senate or doing something stupid rather than actually selling solutions.
On that
or
point,
promoting.
Senator, can I ask you this? The crossbench is made up of a few senators like yourself who've left the major party. David Pocock left the Greens. Senator Payman left Labor Party, and yourself the LNP. Is there a level of camaraderie there amongst the crossbench, given some of the positions you align on, and given how diverse you are as a grouping of people? I mean, I don't think 5 years ago you would have ever seen yourself grouped with some of those senators on an issue.
Well, that's a very good question, and I've been talking about that a lot in the last few weeks, is that we have become a bit of a coalition when it comes to accountability and transparency. I mean, David Pocock, to his credit, even though we disagree, on our views on climate change, for example, he will nearly always back a production for the order of documents. Or anything that, where one of the two major parties say it's commercial in confidence. He's been very good in calling that out. He's also been very good in calling out government overreach, as is Fatima Payment for that matter. So we generally are on a unity ticket when we see the two major parties doing what they usually do and not be transparent and things like that. So where we see that, we work as a bit of a unity ticket. But, I mean, there's plenty of times we still have different views on, climate change, for one. I think Senator Pocock's sort of being a little bit more inquisitive about the COVID vaccine injuries than he was initially. But it's important. Now that I'm on the crossbench, I can see the importance of having a crossbench in the Senate, because the Senate is a house of review. But the problem is it's become a house of the parties. The parties try and control it, and that's bad because we want to scrutinise what the parties are up to. And so that's why we need to increase the size of the actual crossbench on the Senate to hold those two major parties to account. And the best way to do that is get the balance of power so we can wedge them.
The stance that you took with that sort of area with the COVID vaccine, there must have been a lot of pressure within your own party to maybe not speak out like you have been.
Oh, absolutely. It was enormous pressure. And I mean, I had, people call me and tell me that, don't worry about this. We've got to get re-elected. You're damaging our re-election chances. David Littleproud was one of them. And I was like, well, I don't care about your job. I care about these people's lives. And that was, I guess that was where I really hardened cynically. I mean, I get sometimes you miss things you don't, you can't be around everything 100% of the time, but this was just so obviously just ignoring real concerns of the people And especially it was the hypocrisy of it as well. You know, we'd spent 18 months shutting the country down and destroying the economy and destroying people's lives. You know, people couldn't go and see loved ones when they were passing away. You know, they couldn't cross borders. They've been locked up in hotels, etc., being sent $10,000 bills for 2 weeks in quarantine that they couldn't afford. Small businesses were being closed and destroyed. And then suddenly, okay, we can shut the country down to save people from COVID and in that manner. But then when it came to looking after the health when they were injured by their vaccine, oh no, we don't want to know about that. We've got to be re-elected. So that, of course, made me cynical that the entire exercise was nothing more than an excuse just to make themselves look good.
So, can I ask this? My view is that all of what transpired in that time with the harmony of narrative and the censorship and the sort of psychological warfare that was deployed on civilian populations, this could not have taken place without at least the knowledge or the acquiescence of the intelligence community in this country. Do you think that there's a degree of culpability there in this country for what happened in 2021 and 2022?
Within the intelligence community?
Yes. I mean, is there any way what could have taken place did so without their acquiescence or furtherance?
Okay. Well, look, initially, now I don't know the intelligence community, but I mean, the intelligence community know a lot. What I am annoyed about is they won't look at the risks of the gain of function research going on at universities now, right? So step one, we now know that this gain of function stuff happens. There's risks associated with it, and regardless of whatever your motive may be in dealing with gain of function, the fact of the matter is, if you want to take their story, which we now know has been debunked, their story is it was an outbreak from the wet market, but it's highly likely, I think just about everyone admits it came out of the lab now.
CIA's just recently conceded this.
Yeah. So now that they know it came out of the lab, and I've asked this question to ASIO in the past and a couple of other agencies, what are you going to do to make sure that there's no more gain of function research? Well, I mean, I'm not sure that we need gain of function research. So, I mean, it's one of these things now the genie's out of the bottle. I think we need to accept that it's going to be out there. The question is, how do we deal with it? I mean, I'm not sure I want it out of there, but, it's how we put the genie back in the bottle. I'll put to one side. But they're saying that's not our problem, and I'm like, well, I think it is, because I think it's a genuine threat. If something like that was to happen again, I mean, we were sort of coronaviruses are pretty mild. If some sort of something a little bit more severe comes along, and this is why I'm worried about, because they're playing around with gain of function. They could come up with something more severe that could be more dangerous, we can't pretend that it's not a risk, and I think there needs to be a lot more scrutiny and transparency over that. Now, in regards to the origins of coronavirus, technically, if you believe that it was, came out of the Wuhan lab and funded by Fauci, most of that is outside of Australia's jurisdiction, except for the role played by Professor Edward Holmes. He was one of the people talking to Anthony Fauci very early on about the origins of it, and then he was one of the key authors in the Lancet paper that said that the coronavirus was from a wet market and not from a lab. Now, I strongly suspect he's an intelligence asset, and I think he needs to be investigated. And plus the fact that not only was he talking to Fauci, he's received millions of dollars of taxpayer funding from the Australian taxpayer. So he needs to explain why exactly he wrote that Lancet paper. Why would Fauci ring a bloke on the other side of the world? I mean, there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of scientists out there. Why would they ring this guy in Sydney, little old Sydney, Australia? And we do know that he's not Edward Holmes. Now, he was either the deputy director of the Chinese CDC, and he was also tied up with another Chinese university. So he had connections into China as well. So yet again, it begs the question, why was Fauci talking to him very early on, and why did Ed Holmes write that paper that completely dismissed the lab leak origins?
So on that intelligence thing, just one more question. I know you said some comments recently about News Corp being infiltrated by a foreign actor's intelligence agency, and there's been a spate of incidents across the country, most notably the one with the caravan and the farcical list. These are clearly being orchestrated by foreign governments. I think the AFP commissioner said as much. What's the purpose of our foreign interference laws if they're not going to be enforced? I mean, you remember the fanfare about the China and their infiltration with Sam Dastyar and the Labor Party, etc., and Russiagate, the fanfare that was made out of that. Is this not the same issue, but from an ally?
Could be, yeah. I mean, look, I sort of threw that out there just to sort of, see what reaction I'd get, and I got one. But it's a genuine question. I mean, Operation Mockingbird is real. I mean, it's been exposed that intelligence agencies do put, have infiltrated the media in the past, and I have no doubt that they have still, they have still infiltrating the media today.
Well, the former Inspector General David Irvine said as much on the ABC and said, quite frankly, that we use journalists quite often. Now that sort of conversation would be clamped down. I mean, there's no conversation about Julian Assange or anything in this country anymore. Is there enough scrutiny on that area of policy and that function of government?
No, and I'm glad you asked that question, because there's not. And that's why, and this is where I want to distinguish myself from One Nation, who constantly harp on about the World Economic Forum. Now, while that may be an influential think tank, and I'm not saying they're not, tank. I'm pretty sure the intelligence agencies don't pick up the phone every morning to Klaus Schwab and ask which country they're going to, overthrow today or who they're going to take out, right? And I think we need much greater scrutiny of our intelligence agencies. In particular, we've seen it overseas, but I think we need to ask ourselves what's going on here as well.
Is there any scrutiny of the intelligence agencies? I mean, as far as I'm aware, we've effectively written out scrutiny or oversight from Parliament, and it's in the hands of an Inspector General. Do you have any questions and estimates that are private or you're not allowed to ask of the intelligence?
No, I post them, and I get basically shut down every time. I mean, I've asked them about the Australian politician who sold us out. I said, who is it? Have they been charged? What's going on? Can't say. I've asked for ASIS, which is the Australian Secret Intelligence Service Community. So ASIO is the onshore lot, ASIS is the offshore lot. Look, I mean, and they've declined every time. I've asked them about 3 or 4 times. They don't even have to appear in estimates, right? Now, to be fair, do you really want some of that stuff being exposed? I mean, look, I think way too much stuff is covered up in this country, especially around domestic policy and just, Albanese's road, for example, $100 million he spent on the road to the beach house. These things aren't national security issues. I'll accept that in some case there may be genuine national security issues that may be covered up, even though, let's face it, China's just sailed around Australia, or the Chinese Navy is currently sailing around, circumnavigating Australia at the moment, and that's hardly being kept a secret. So just sort of what the big, a lot of the strategy, really, it's pretty obvious. We're an isolated country in the South Pacific who still need to rely on our allies. That's not really a secret. But you're right, there's not enough. And a lot of this stuff too, though, like, I mean, this it's an interesting blow up. Again, I don't want to sort of let this become the focus of my campaign. I want to focus on real solutions for real Australians. But the fact that Sky News blew it up, I've just lost my train of thought there, but it's significant. It annoys me how the media are focusing on one part, and look, what's going on in Gaza and Palestine and Israel is tragic and shouldn't happen. Like, we want to see peace there as soon as possible. But there has been an inordinate amount of attention given to that here in Australia, along with, and for the last 18 months, and of course the 18 months before that was The Voice. So we really need these guys focusing on the issues that matter. But the fact that they allow themselves to go off in these tangents suggests to me they don't have the solution. So they do this to bait people. And the coalition are doing this. So the Labor did this with The Voice and played on our guilt. or played on people's guilt about the past. Now the coalition are deliberately red baiting people into and goading people and I believe dog whistling around, laying into the like that, albeit I do think there's assimilation problems in that community. 20 years ago, we were bombing the Middle East, and now they're wondering why we've got a refugee problem here. Well, how about we stop bombing the Middle East and get out of the Middle East, and then we won't have the Muslims coming here. So it's all intertwined, I guess.
I'm very conscious of your time, and I appreciate you've already given us more than you said you would. But I just finished. You touched on that the issues and the tensions that have been rising, and we just had the recent hate speech laws passed, and there is massive concern, definitely from my point of view, with some of the terms and the wording. And initially, I thought it was just anything that incited violence, which I feel like if you're inciting violence, that's probably something we do need to clamp down on. But it's terms like reckless and political opinion that really concern me, especially as a political commentator and social commentator. What can happen to? I'm a father. I don't want to be, presented with the potential of going to jail for, 12 months for having an opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you're right. Like I say that there's three levels. There's violence. There's threatening violence. So if I can sort of say something to you now, and because you're on the other side of the country, it's nothing more than an empty threat. But if I was in your face, threatening violence or inciting violence, all of that stuff, I think it's fairly clear. But then when you come to the speech side of things, and there's a couple of good examples. There's a bloke called Damien Richardson in Victoria who was at a,
former Neighbours star
Damien
Richardson.
What's that, sorry?
A former star of Neighbours and has actually been in the audience at one of my shows.
Really?
And he was having a crack at the Nazis and, I don't know, sort of threw up the Nazi hand or whatever. But, as he was saying, my grandfathers fought the Nazis. Like, he was actually against what they were saying. And somehow they've come after him. And he's now going to court over that. That is terrifying, right? When clearly the what he said wasn't even... he was condemning them, not even supporting them, and somehow they've now got him up for that. And then you've got the case of Pete Evans a few years ago. He's not going to, been charged with anything, but he put a black sun up, a black sun, which apparently is a Nazi symbol. I only read about this the last week or two, actually. I've known about it before the hate speech bill. I would have brought it up. But he didn't know that, and then they got stuck into him over it. And I looked it up, and I thought, well, I wouldn't have known that symbol was related to the Nazis either. But, a slightly different angle is that, that song going around Pink Pony Club at the moment, that Pink Pony Club song?
No, not across very much pop culture.
Well, anyway, it's a really catchy song that's about the Pink Pony Club, right? And I've got an 8-year-old daughter who, heard it and was singing it. And, my world at the moment is, as a father, is my daughter loves cats and horses and animals and all that stuff, and that's my life and everything. But, of course, I like to listen to a bit of music sometimes when I'm working in the background, so I whack on YouTube and just let it, play random songs. That came up. And, of course, it was actually about a, strip club / sort of this girl that left Tennessee and all that. But it's just, how many times have we done that? We've actually looked into the meaning of the words of the song, and it's completely different to what we thought it was. Just coming back to how we can interpret different words differently, that hate speech bill. And the thing about that was on the back of originally the disinformation bill, which we got voted down. Then there was the online safety bill, which didn't get voted down. And as a parent of 3 young children, you can block these kids from actually accessing certain apps and that. So I always felt that superfluous, wasn't going to do anything. But of course, if you've got to be social media companies are now surveilling us. And now this has got up this hate speech thing, hate speech bill, and everything you just said then was right. And on top of that, it's actually duplication, because Damien, for example, has been charged under Victorian state law. New South Wales are charging those nurses under New South Wales state law. At the same time, we've got everyone on the right side of politics saying we've got to get rid of the duplication of state and federal government services, and yet they've just brought in another layer of regulation that sits over the top of the state law. So, completely superfluous, but, can be used, will be used to shut people down that don't stick to the narrative.
Senator, can I just ask one more question? I know you wanted to distinguish yourself from One Nation earlier, and Cameron and I were in the room when we saw Malcolm Roberts speak very eloquently and passionately against the 4 interlocking pieces of legislation of totalitarianism as he saw it. And then somehow the One Nation senators forgot to rock up for the vote on the one of the bills. What's your view on One Nation? Because there's a view here that they're taking the Australian people for a ride.
I don't think that's fair. Pauline wasn't there. Malcolm was there. Malcolm voted against all the amendments to water the bill down. So he voted for one amendment, which was Matt Canavan's amendment. It was a good amendment that wanted greater clarity around the definition of violence. That didn't get up. So clearly Malcolm knew that the bill was vague in terms of the definition of violence because he supported Matt Canavan's bill. But then there are other bills that were passed by the Greens or put forward by the Greens. And okay, my view is I don't care who puts it forward. If it's a good bill, it's a good bill. One of them was to carve out 14-year-olds, people under 14, because let's face it, kids, they can easily be brainwashed by their parents or adults. And they just, how many times as kids we've done stupid things and didn't even know we were doing stupid things. Another one was a good faith amendment. So in the case of Damien Richardson, he was clearly mocking, the Nazis or whatever. He voted against that. He voted against the sunset clause or removing the mandatory sentencing for the clause. And there was also another one where we're going to have a 6-month review. Now, he voted against all of those, but he didn't vote for the bill in the end. And he's got angry with me because I said they supported the bill. One Nation supported the two major parties. I still say silence is consent. And if you voted against those amendments, I'll admit I was poor choice of words. I accept that. But I would argue that in that particular case, and it subsequently turns out that Pauline did say she would support it. Now, look, we all make mistakes, right? I'm not going to knock One Nation because most of the time they get it right. However, my problem with One Nation at the moment is that I want to see the minor parties get a senator up from every state at every election so we get 12 senators up, right? Now, One Nation don't have state divisions. They run everything out of Queensland. And yes, Queensland have got 2 senators up. And I'm running against Malcolm in this election, so I'm also speaking out of self-interest, I should declare. But we need to get a proper federal minor party that is going to have good state divisions with branches and that can get senators up in every state at every election so we get 12 senators. And then we move into getting minor parties, like the minor parties start winning lower house seats, which over time I think we can do. So it's more the organisational structure of One Nation, which is sort of why I believe where I think people first get, we obviously, just because of my background, we've got a better understanding of the economics, but, Malcolm's an ex-engineer, mining engineer, I think, so he's obviously got certain skill sets as well. And I'd argue being 16 years younger, I've got a little bit more longevity, and I think we need to start appealing to younger people as well. So the transition plan, what's One Nation's transition plan, that hasn't been laid out. And I think that's what we need. And I'm willing to work. So I'm talking to Family First. I'm talking to Libertarians. I'm talking to the Trumpeter Patriot. I'm willing to work with these other minor parties to get other people up. So I'm going to work with the Libertarians to get Craig Kelly up in New South Wales. I'm going to work with Family First to get their candidate up in South Australia. Victoria's a bit of a tussle between quite a few parties there, and there's some good candidates down there as well. And so.
And how come none in Western Australia? We feel we're always left out over here in the West, Senator.
I have asked some very good candidates, and they can't do it at the moment. And I'm waiting to hear back from one particular lady who would be a very good candidate. But I still intend to run a candidate in WA. But at the same time, I want quality over quantity. Because if they do get in, I don't want to do what Clive Palmer did with Jackie Lambie, where you get people in and you're stuck with them, right? Mm-hmm. So it's got to be...
Have a bloody look at yourself, Senator!
Yeah. Look, we, Jackie and me, agree on some things, we don't agree on other things, whatever. But, she went in under what I'd call a conservative banner, and she goes left. She's on our side with accountability and transparency, to be fair to Jackie. But on other issues, you're sort of like, I'm pretty sure that's not, you sort of, when you first came in, that wasn't the people that voted for you wouldn't have voted for you to be pushing that. But that's the thing. You want people that you still want to get good quality people that are going to be professional, erudite, polished, stay, calm and collected. not shout and things like that, so that we can start to engage and influence people. And that's the other thing too. Like, I'm not. I'll tell you this now. I don't want Australia to leave the UN. I'm happy, to cut all ties if we have any, to cut any influence with the WEF, and to get out of the World Health Organization. I've got no things for that. But as a small isolated country in the South Pacific, I do think we need to be using our diplomatic. We have to use our diplomatic resources to the maximum extent we can. And I still believe in the initial purpose of the United Nations, which was to set up to stop war. That should be its only purpose, like all the World Health Organization, all that's got to go. I mean, it'd be nice. When I grew up, back in the 70s, used to get National Geographic and you'd read about, these organisations that would help bring clean water to starving African countries. I mean, that's still a nice thing in theory. I'd like to think most African countries now are developed enough that that's no longer an issue. But really, countries have to take responsibility for their own health, not, be dictated to by supranational bodies. But the ultimate, and the reason why I say that is that we've got to learn to influence other people, even if we disagree with them. It's really, really important that we keep an open mind. We treat other people with respect, even if we have different views. And not sort of just go, well, we're going to get out of this, we're going to get out of that, and not engage with people. Because I see there's certain people in Canberra that don't do that, and as a result, they can't influence outcomes. And so we have to be polished and professional and treat people professionally as well, so that we can influence people, influence the people who are in charge to get better outcomes, because it's all about serving the people. And if you go down there and sort of sit in your corner, you're not going to get those outcomes. So we've got to learn to, and be able to, try and get some outcomes for the people that really need help.
Senator, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. You've gone way over what you said you'd give us. So
Okay. Worries.
I really do appreciate that. Is there anything you want to finish on and just let the people know?
Cheers. Thanks. Look, if you do want to help out with People First, hop on to www.peoplefirstparty.au, and you can either, we've closed nominations for candidates because I think the election's going to be called in the next week or so, but you can volunteer to hand out how to vote cards, make a donation, or we'd love you to become a member of the party.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, mate. Me and Corey might decompress and have a bit of a chat after this, but really appreciate your time and good luck.
Thanks very much, Senator.
Worries.
All the best.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
Cheers.
We'll up on some other time.
Yeah, easy, mate.
Okay.
That was good. Very nice there, Corey. We'll just chat for another 10 minutes if you want to.
Yeah, mate. It's a public holiday. I haven't got anywhere to be.
Yeah, so that was fucking very interesting. Mate, you came at him pretty well as well from a good place. Good couple of questions I wasn't even considering asking. So
yeah, well, I mean, he can talk the leg off a Queen Anne chair, Senator.
Yeah.
It's hard to get a word in there.
Yeah.
But he's in campaign mode and very wide-ranging conversation. I thought he was quite candid and he strikes me as to look at Malcolm Turnbull, but with a rugged Queensland.
The major parties, they're combining to entrench their sticking rotten duopoly in this den of iniquity. As I say, major party bred, major party fed.
Oh, fuck, you've nailed that. That's very good. But no, he does. He strikes me as someone who's understanding of some of the things that we need to do.
Yes, he understands the problem, so he's in a position to propose a solution.
Yeah.
That's the other issue we've got. People can't comprehend the nature of the problem, so they're in no position to offer an alternative or a solution.
Yeah. So while you're here, might as well socially commentate on a few other things that are going on. We had a bit of a chat off air prior about the Trump stuff and how I'm starting to get a little bit off side of some things. I certainly agree, for example, this Zelensky issue, this blow up in the Oval Office. I kind of agree he needed to be sort of put in his place in this way, but potentially behind closed doors. But I'm also seeing that like you said before, this is business as usual, it seems to be. And Trump's doing a few things I agree with a lot, but I disagree with some things. And I think that's healthy to have those sorts of neutral ideas.
Oh, look, I mean, my great scepticism was always that it was going to be a fraud. And it was going to be the Obama thing, but
from the right, and we'll tell you whatever we need to get elected.
It was the
sell you
fear,
hope
wasn't
and
it?
change. And to be fair, they do throw some breadcrumbs here, and say the right words and push the diversity or anti-diversity, anti-woke buttons here and there.
Yep.
But I think it's the takeover of the tech oligarchs is really concerning.
Yeah.
And, you've got guys like Sam Altman saying we need to rejig the social contract. These are huge, wide-ranging things they're discussing, and the emergence of Palantir and the rise of this little tech oligarchy that essentially got the keys to the White House at the moment. It's really frightening.
I've never been sold on Elon, for example.
He's got a real lust for power. I mean, of all the tech oligarchs, he's the only one who strikes me as a guy who's got a real lust for power. I mean, Bezos just looks like he wants, some hot chicks and a super yacht. Zuckerberg just wants to be cool.
Yeah.
But Elon's the only one who, comes from, very rugged, independent place where you can see your own name in a country, Rhodesia, for instance.
Yeah.
This is the mindset I think Elon sees it in. He might have Elonia. And he wants to colonize and have slaves up in his new extraterrestrial residence. Wouldn't that be funny though? In 200 years, there's like a neo-colonial refresh, and we're having to tear down the statues of Elon. Fucking rename it.
That AI generated video really put me off a lot. That Trump shared, him and Netanyahu's having cocktails in Gaza.
Yeah,
it felt weird. It felt very odd. Look, part of me, I'm still optimistic that I'm just going to do what I'm going to do now because the issues happened. But then a part of me is like, well, was this always the plan? And I have no idea. It's really hard. I'm trying to remain optimistic, but then no one wants their egos bruised. They don't want to go, I supported Trump because I did. And then
everyone was all in on it. And it's the same thing it goes back, we know this about the vaccine. Remember people were all in on the vaccine, and then they don't want to admit that they got sold a lie. The same with Ukraine. I mean, even in your personal life, if you get love scammed by a Nigerian and he swindles you out of 60 grand in super, do you know what I mean? Like, you're not exactly going out there telling the world that you got fucking taken for a ride.
Well, I think the one thing we've seen from the Epstein files, which is what the fuck was
What
that?
a fucking joke this all is.
The only thing I will say is that, 4 or 5 years ago when this was all leaked anyway. I don't know how it was leaked. I don't know if it was WikiLeaks or some of these things that we're seeing already. We already had. So you had that list of phone numbers, and then they redacted that list.
Redacting things already in the public domain.
The one thing, I need to go back and look upon this list because what else was leaked with that? Does that sort of confirm what else was leaked with it? Because that was true.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, Pam Bondi, what a goose.
Yeah.
She's had this fucking photo op, got a bunch of influencers in, given them a binder that's got nothing in it.
Yeah.
This is not disclosure. This is just, feeding the chooks.
And is it just posturing by saying, I'm declaring an investigation into the FBI?
Look, this is the problem. It doesn't matter who you vote for in the United States. The Israel lobby gets in. And they firmly got control of that administration.
And this is my fear. Because I'm still optimistic on the Trump thing. I'm not completely blind to it. I'm not completely fucking ignorant to some of the poor things that are going on. My fear is that I can see the Israel alignment that Trump has, and in regards to this specifically, the Epstein situation, he was, in my opinion, clearly an Israel agent for Mossad, and that seems to be like. Hence why
the narrative is so controlled and the disclosures are such stage managed affairs. There's nothing in there. They're trying to hide it because I think the reality is to disclose that list and give the public that information, the whole political, economic, media, judicial establishment is no longer tenable, right? Because it's effectively an admission that you've sexually blackmailed people in every institution that controls society.
It's scary.
Yeah. And Whitney Webb's book, One Nation Under Blackmail, this is how effectively the world works when you're talking about raw, hard power tactics.
It's certainly a little concerning.
Makes you wonder who would be blackmailed here sexually in Australia, you know?
Well,
has Guy Sebastian got some video floating around? Guy, we need you to just support the vaccine. Remember what we've got on that hard drive?
Oh, my God. Well, what I do
Where's the
consider...
Australian comedians at?
Well, what I do consider is, like, look at me and you, for example. Me and you would be the sort of ideal candidates of people who would go, right, I want to make a difference. I'm going to do a Trump. I'm going to try and go in and make an impact. And then if we tried to do some things and found some blocks and some things that we go, oh shit, actually it's better off that this isn't known and blah, blah, blah. Do you think we would be thrown under the bus the same way? Like, do you think this is just a common thing no matter who it is?
No, look, I think that form of blackmail is used particularly to control people who are a threat to established interests and power. But, you know, this is the problem. You need to raise people in fucking cages, really, to make sure they've never done anything real in their lives. Because ultimately, if you put anyone's life under the microscope, you could find something that would be discreditable in the public eye.
Yeah. Definitely. Going back on what we were talking with Rennick about, and you brought it up with Malcolm Roberts, because I was really taken aback by that, because he was this pillar of strength. I don't care if I'm wrong. If I'm outnumbered, I'm going to stand up for what I believe is right. And then hearing that he still voted no against some of the other parts of that has changed that in my head. I really felt we were betrayed. I still think to a point, silence is what's the word?
Silence is violence. But, you know, look, I'm always skeptical. I've long been skeptical of the One Nation Party because people won't remember the Peter Slipper affair and James Ashby, who is effectively Pauline Hanson's right-hand man, was a staffer tasked with effectively putting a honey trap forward he's a gay man, for Peter Slipper, who was the Speaker of the House, and this was in a minority government. And the Federal Court Justice Stephen Reyes found that it was a conspiracy by the Liberal National Party with James Ashby to bring down an Australian government. And it's not discussed. And James Ashby is a very cunning political operator. And look, I'm very sceptical of One Nation. I think they're a fraud and taking the Australian people for a ride. And I think Rennick did try and picked up on it initially. You know, he wanted to distinguish himself from One Nation. But, you know, they're both senators from Queensland, so, you know, there's some deal being done about preferences somewhere.
It's the one thing I've learned over the last probably month or two where we've had a lot of politicians on, specifically independents or minor parties, where we can. And one part of me has just realised I think I want to stick to the hippie woo-woo stories and just a bit of motivation, self-help, health stuff, because this politics stuff is really
dispiriting.
Oh, yes, it is.
And like most of the people in it are spazzers, right? Like,
yeah.
You've got to be it's like doing stand-up. You've got to be a special type of person
to
go into
I
it
agree.
in the first place. But I think politics attracts a particularly dull and
ego-driven, do you think?
Yeah, ego-driven personality. And look, the reality is most of them aren't that smart.
Do you think it's
something? Yes, man. And you look at it in the Liberal and Labor candidates, you know, it's like, oh, we've got the, you know, successful small business mum, and oh, yeah, we've got the Indian family who are successful small business owners too, you know. But they're just people who will take orders from the party elites. And they're controllable.
Do you think that's something you could go into long term or would want to?
Yeah, look, I was asked to run in this upcoming state election, but I took the view now's not my time. Nothing's going to change in terms of the power dynamics electorally, but I think the following election will, and I think there'll be a hung parliament, and the independents, if they're owning the lower house, might hold the balance of power. And it would be funny if I, you know, got a seat as an independent and Basil had to come to me. And I'm like, well, we'll make the issue about gas, Baz. What do you reckon?
Oh, fuck.
Let's see who wins in the public sphere there.
Mate, it is a public holiday. I completely forgot about that today, so I won't keep you any longer. But thanks so much for joining us. Fucking very good questions and very good co-host there, Corey.
Thank you very much. And if I've got any listeners in Adelaide, I'm coming to Adelaide Fringe.
Perfect.
Do a weekend of show. I got a new show called, you ready for this? The Cucky Country.
Are you using Amos's room, or what are you doing
Yeah,
there?
so I'm in Amos's room there on Rundle Street, the Fringe Underground Comedy Club.
Awesome.
We're going to be hosting the Late Show as well, and we've also got a show that Branchy was on at the Fringe here that we're being lent by the inimitable Darius Davies over in the UK, Hayton Live, which is effectively Good Newsweek meets Roast Battle, and it's a lot of fun. So
I loved it. I actually, and having been a part of it,
did you get paid?
No.
Good. So comics just take note.
Mate,
He's got a podcast that didn't fucking pay.
I was seating people, and he's like, "Mate,
you were running the room.
I was
You didn't
running
get
the room.
fucking paid.
I was running the room, and you couldn't make it." So he's like, "Do you want to quickly jump up?" I was like, yeah, okay, cool. It's good. It's fucking fun, and yeah, I actually, if I was going to recommend people go watch a show, generally it's something like that. It's a lot of fun. A bit of crowd involvement gives you that sort of that buzz, but. Fuck yeah, mate. Thanks so much for joining us.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me. And yeah, all the best in the next few weeks.
Perfect.
Moving forward.
No, easy.
Bye-bye.
All right.